So my name is Thomas Bachmann. I'm a consultant at Biochar Zero, a consultancy for biochar project developers here in Europe. And today I want to present the results of a market research that we did recently with industry scale biochar producers in Europe. In the next 20 to 25 minutes, we will cover economic aspects as well as operational aspects of industry scale biochar production. And we will cover details on common capital expenditures as well as operational expenditures and revenue streams. And we will also look at some common hurdles and how to address them. The goal for this presentation is really to share our insights, which can be used either by new producers while they develop their business model, but also by existing producers to benchmark, for example, their cost and revenue structures against the market. And on top of that, you will also learn some best practices for optimizing, for example, the feedstock, your cost structures, your revenues, streams, how to finance the projects, and also strategies to find buyers of your produced biochar. When we performed the study, we had the motivation that a lot of organizations that consider to produce biochar, they need to better understand or need a better understanding of commercial aspects in order to build their business case. And this in order is critical to get investments, as the biochar production is quite a significant investment endeavor, both from the capital expenditures, but also from the operating costs. So the goal was really to understand what it takes to be a profitable biochar producer by learning from other biochar producers about their revenue streams, about their feedstocks, and also their cost structures. As approach, we chose semi-structured interviews to identify key factors of those profitable biochar productions. And we focused here on European producers and woody biomass to limit ourselves. As a result, we can provide a ranking of both capital expenditures, also operational expenditures and revenue streams, as well as industry best practices that we gained from a group of 9 European industry scale biochar producers. Maybe some more words on the methodology that we applied. So the information that we gained from those producers, we validated based on publicly available information, for example, on company websites or news articles, but also our own market insights as consultants for biochar for a couple of years. Please understand that we cannot disclose the study participants as we needed to ensure their anonymity in order to get those sensitive internal insights from them. And some limitations applied as well. So we recognize that it's still a small industrial scale biochar market here in Europe. We also had a relatively small sample size with 9 producers. And the qualitative character also has some limitations. But we still think that we got some good results out of this. On the right-hand side on the screen, you can see an example how we performed this analysis. So we asked, for example, the producers to rank the capital expenditures based on the categories that we gave them from the highest to the lowest. And then we also asked them, for example, to draw a line which set of capital expenditures cover 80% of their capex. And then we analyzed this data further and did the same with the operational expenditures and similar way also with the revenue streams. Now that we have a good understanding of the methodology that we applied, we want to take a look at the cost drivers, both CapEx and OpEx, and also the revenue drivers where we focused on biochar itself, the carbon credits that you can generate from them, and energy in the form of heat and electricity. Those are key aspects to get the puzzle of biochar production, as we call it, right. And we will conclude the section with a summary. Let's first take a look at the capital expenditures. Here we looked at equipment costs, building costs, cost for land, financing, planning, certifications, and also others. And what we found across the board that the capex structure is fairly consistent across those industry scale biochar producers that we interviewed. And it is dominated by the equipment and the building cost. all producers stated equipment cost being the number one capital expenditures, and most also said that building cost is the second. And interestingly, both together already make up 80% of the total investment needed for most of the producers. What we found out about the equipment was that most use continuous processing over batch processing, because this allowed them to be reach a higher autonomy and require also in the operations less expenses for operational staff. What we also found was that most successful in terms of profitability producers, they use off-the-shelf equipment, which is of course modular and assembled, but they don't use self-developed equipment. And also, they looked very consistently at achieving high uptime. So oftentimes they have a service level agreement with the producers of the equipment to have a streamlined process for the whole plant. The supplier itself of the equipment seems not to be a key distinguisher for being profitable or not. We saw all sorts of vendors across the board for profitable businesses, as well as businesses who are using different equipment from different producers and on different projects, which was quite interesting to see. From the cost perspective, surprisingly, the numbers that we gained were pretty close to each other from many producers. And on average, we could figure out that it needs about 4 million euros to produce 1,000 tons of biochar per year. And on top of that comes usually the investment for electricity generation equipment, a turbine and a generator, together with over 1 million euros on top, which we found in 7 out of the 9 producers. Those are quite significant numbers, of course, if you're starting a new venture. And we saw that almost all producers used also multi-million EU grants from programs like EU Horizon or the Innovation Fund to finance this. Otherwise, they would not be able to make it a profitable business and get a business case off the ground. These investments or these financing cases are quite heavy in the structure if you want to get the EU grants. So here we saw also recommendations to decide early which program you want to apply for, work with a partner on that, so that you can anticipate all the requirements that those programs bring into your business plan. Next, let's take a look at the operational expenditures. Here we looked at biomass, plant operation staff, logistics, energy, site rent, if applicable, downtime, maintenance, insurance, marketing, sales, and also the gas usage if needed. And here the picture was quite different. So we saw much more variance across the board of the ranking, which we can see also on the right-hand diagram. Although still on the median, the biomass and the logistics combined were the key cost drivers for the producers. And here the recommendation was that you should look for very homogeneous, high-quality biomass, because this in return allows you a high degree of automation and also a high degree of equipment utilization, because you have less switches, less disturbances, and that drives up your profitability as you can increase the utilization significantly, and at the same time reduce your plant operation staff expenses. We found on that part producers who are already at one person operating the whole plant with being on call. So if you are able to instrument your plant with sensors, it's possible to do that. Others are also close to it or striving to get to operating the whole plant with just one FTE, one full-time equivalent, which significantly brings down your operational costs, of course, but it requires this homogeneous biomass feedstocks. Because if it's not homogeneous, we saw lots of disturbances, mostly from minerals, but also from nails and other disturbances in the feedstock. So that brings me to the last point on OpEx. In the first 1 to 2 years, the downtime was usually much higher than expected, which means even though you test your feedstock in a trial pyrolysis, you should anticipate that in the beginning you need a good ramp-up time and also some R&D effort to optimize your plant, work together also with your vendors, with your engineers to optimize the whole process to automate it end to end. Now that we covered the expenses, let's also take a look at the revenue streams. The revenue structure, similar to the operating expenses, is quite dependent on the business model. What I forgot to mention before was that on the biomass part, for example, we see for most it's the number one cost driver on operating expenses, but there were also providers where it was low or even zero, or they could gain even money from it by using it as a waste that they take from their producers of biomass. So as the structure is quite variant based on your business model, also the revenues can be quite variant or can have a high variance. Still, if we look at the median biochar producers from our set of industrial scale biochar producers we interviewed, we saw biochar revenues itself make 50 or more percent. Carbon credits about 26%, and energy in the form of heat and electricity combined 21%. The biochar was mostly sold by the producers either directly to agriculture or concrete applications in large volumes, or within their group organization, they have a sister company that creates higher value products from the raw biochar or minimal processed biochar. This is quite critical as the biochar itself as a raw material is difficult to sell on the open market. The demand for that is not so high, but if you can further enhance it and make a ready-made product for different applications, it's much easier. And if you have that application in-house or in a sister company, then it's much easier to find a buyer or consumer of that biochar. Connected to that is, of course, the carbon credits, which you only gain when the biochar is applied. So it's really key to find a consistent structure to sell your biochar. On the carbon credit side, we identified that most producers use EBCC Sync or Puro certification schemes for their biochar credits. And they sold it either directly in large volumes or through marketplaces and MRV providers, and in particular the Carbon Future marketplace was mentioned here as being dominant. The energy aspect comes in the form of heat and electricity. As mentioned before, 7 out of 9 producers also produce electricity, not just heat. And most use it also internally. So either the heat or both heat and electricity internally, and only sell the excess heat or electricity to either co-located plants or district heating networks or the electricity grid. Generally, it was seen the most successful businesses have found a way to use a lot of the producers of pyrolysis either in their own organization or within the group of the organization. As this makes your business model much less complex and much less reliant on market dynamics. Now, to conclude the study, we saw that standardized equipment is used by most producers. It provides you a high flexibility in your revenue streams if you embed also the electricity generation, because you gain another revenue stream. And you need still some R&D capacity, especially in the first 1 or 2 years for your plant optimization. Also, EU grants should be utilized to significantly reduce the investment cost and make it a profitable business in the end. And heavily internal resources and needs should be analyzed so you can leverage all the produced biochar, carbon credits, or energy internally as much as possible, as you have the highest benefits there. Just to give an example, if you have a organization that requires a lot of electricity and you buy this on the open market, you pay the normal price. If you can produce it and consume it yourself through pyrolysis, your price is much lower. And also, if you cannot use it yourself, you would need to sell it to the grid, but also the price you get if you sell it to the grid is much lower. So you can make it's a profitable case if you can use the generated electricity yourself, because then you don't need to buy it from the higher price for the grid, from the grid. It is also recommended to build strong relationships with partners, both on the technology side, but also on the actual biochar product that you're building or selling. On the technology side, because you aim for a high utilization of the equipment to drive up your yield. And also on the biochar side, you need to constantly continue developing your product to find buyers for it. And usually it's already complex to operate a pyrolysis business and plant. So if you also focus at the same time at making a ready-made biochar product out of that, that becomes another complexity that you might rather want to work with a partner with. Having said that, those are more generalized recommendations that we found in most or many of the interviewed producers, but not all. There's a high variance. Some do everything themselves. Some produce just biochar and sell it. So this should not be discouraging you to look at other creative ways. As I illustrated before, the biochar puzzle is quite complex. You need to think about your location, your biomass sourcing, the equipment selection, how to finance it, partnerships for your products. You need to find off-takers for your heat, for the electricity, for the carbon credits. And all this takes time and energy. But we see also on the positive side that it can be done. There are many examples out in the market where this is done in a profitable way, where the businesses are expanding. And it cannot only be profitable, but it's also, of course, a contribution to our circular economy and to mitigate the climate change. Now, before we go into the questions and answers, I want to briefly share what we at Biochar Zero do. We help biochar project developers throughout Europe, throughout their entire journey. And our services include early stage assessments, project planning, also preparing certifications and supporting them through the certification process. We help conduct feasibility studies, and we also do many more customized guidances that involve different activities around biochar production. Not only during the ramp-up phase, but also during production if you want to optimize your operations or expand your business. Also, if you're a researcher, we're interested in supporting your work as an industry partner. So also feel free to contact us when you have a research project where you might be able to collaborate with us. Now, I want to thank you for the attention. And if you like this content, I would like to invite you to follow us on LinkedIn. Our handle there is Biochar Zero. We post there a lot of resources that we come across in our consultancy work. For example, we also have there a biochar project developer guide that covers the content of this presentation also in a bit more detail. And you can also contact us over LinkedIn or over email, or you can leave your email address here in the chat or your LinkedIn profile, and we can connect there as well. And with this out of the way, I'm happy to hear questions, and yeah, we can discuss our findings.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas. You got a couple of questions, but I just wanted to directly jump at it, and I think Dan Wrench also asked it. Did you get any return on investment rates from the producers?
No, unfortunately, we couldn't obtain those.
Or a quick follow-up, are any expected lifetime of the pyrolysis plants that they internally calculate with?
Also that not. One ROI figure that we did receive was for the electricity generation. Here it's depending whether you sell or use the electricity yourself between 3 and 5 years. So this was very encouraging to hear.
So from your numbers, to me, it sounds very expensive, surprisingly expensive actually, to produce biochar in Europe. Do you and I was especially interested in the one full time equivalent to run the plant. Um, is the equipment a bit over-engineered by now, maybe? Because it's very expensive and you don't need any operators anymore. Um, or do you think profitability is still there even with these high costs?
So yes, definitely there are profitable businesses that are also expanding at these high costs. So we're looking here at industry scale production, which is, let's say, 1,000 tons per year or more of biochar. And at that scale, it makes sense to invest in automation because otherwise your scaling of the business scales linearly with, or even more than linearly with your operation staff. This is something you usually want to avoid with scaling the business. Um, but uh, regarding the question whether it's over-engineered or not, I cannot make any comments. We did see that even very sophisticated equipment has challenges because we're dealing with biomass, which has a high variety. And sometimes you need extra equipment to clean it, which you didn't anticipate, or to mix it with other equipment so you have no clogging in the process. So even with sophisticated equipment, you need extra fine-tuning.
Um, so that's from my side. Questions from the chat. Manolis was asking, I guess the projects evaluated are primarily focused on biochar production rather than gasification plants. Is that the case?
Yes, we looked primarily at biochar production and optimized for biochar production.
Um, the next one was, did you, John Hoffmeyer was asking if you have the feeling that the biochar industry in Europe is operating in silos similar to in South Africa, or if the industry is actually communicating with each other. Is there a network effect in Europe?
Um, We are also presenting soon at the German Biochar Forum, and we see that a lot of producers are reaching out and then connecting, and we're networking there. So I guess on those industry events, also Bio 360 in Nantes, we do see, yeah, organizations talk to each other and sharing experiences. At least over those conferences, that's what we see. Yes.
Dan Wrench was asking, from the results on markets for the biochar, do you see any emerging uses that might be small now but are likely to increase? For example, in roadside water filters, plastics, or any use cases you imagine?
Um, so we have seen um, definitely the concrete case, but I guess that's already ramping up, so that's not a new case. Um, the others, like battery or filters or so on, we have not seen those mentioned by the producers we interviewed, but all are open to look into other ways or having maybe small research projects. And I guess composites would be one possible way that they mentioned to look in next to ramping up concrete now.
And I guess, I mean, a lot will be down to legislation, um, sometimes being an obstacle to some applications, at least now. Um, So, Christoph Baumann was asking, why do 7 out of 9 of your analyzed businesses choose electricity over heat as a revenue driver?
Maybe that came across incorrectly. It's both. It's a combination. So you always have the heat, but if you want to produce electricity, you need an extra turbine and generator. Typically, it's being used.
And then another question from Dan was, how much biochar on average were your producers making per year? If
On average, it
more,
is it is roughly around this 1,000 tons. So it's roughly the limit, yeah,
okay.
of industry scale, what we consider inside Biochar Zero as industry scale.
Uh,
But we see them expanding and then building another plant at a different site also with about this size.
And maybe as a last question from my side, so after you have done this study, and you looked specifically at wood biomass,
Correct.
what's your opinion? Do you think your answers would be very different if you look at more than wood at waste feedstocks?
I did not make up my mind on that, so I cannot comment. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so thank you very much, Thomas. I guess Thomas will be in the chat or around in the chat if you
Yes.
have a question for him. Also, please visit their website if you are a project developer. And other than this, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah. Thank you,
Um,
Christian. Thanks all for your questions.